Talk to fluency from beginner to fluent.
Take your English skills to the next level.
Okay, so let's unpack this.
Yeah.
For so many people trying to get better at English, especially when it comes to actually speaking fluently and confidently, there's this feeling that it's just, kind of a massive, overwhelming task. It feels like you need to juggle like 100 things at once: vocab, grammar, pronunciation, listening practice, speaking, and that the only way forward is through this constant grinding struggle.
Yeah, that feeling you just described, that's exactly what the source material we're diving into today acknowledges right up front. It gets that common perception that improving means mastering everything all at the same time, and that it has to feel difficult, constantly.
Right.
But what's really interesting is that the sources then strongly push back on that idea.
They don't just push back, they argue that this feeling isn't just like unpleasant, it's actually inaccurate. The core message seems to be that improving your English might actually be, significantly easier than you've been led to believe.
Precisely. And the mission, as it's framed in this material, is really to demystify that whole process.
Yeah.
To show that getting better doesn't require that overwhelming struggle, but can actually be approached in a way that's enjoyable, really effective, and genuinely sustainable, for the long term.
Okay, I'm already interested there because enjoyable and easier. Those are definitely not the words most people associate with language learning struggles.
Right.
Now, the sources also point to a practical first step, don't they? A specific tool to help with this sort of new approach.
Yes, they do. They highlight a resource called an intentional listening blueprint. It's described as a free downloadable guide.
Okay.
And the sources position listening as like a foundational skill, maybe the most crucial starting point. And this blueprint is presented as a way to make building that foundation consistent, focused, and importantly, enjoyable.
Got it. Enjoyable listening, focused.
Yeah.
And you can grab that blueprint just by using the link in the description for this deep dive, right? You share your email and you get the guide. Sounds like a pretty concrete way to start putting this kind of practice the sources are talking about into action.
Yeah, it seems designed to help you take that very first step, really, in line with their whole methodology.
Absolutely. So, okay, let's move beyond that initial promise and the blueprint itself. What are the core arguments, the key shifts in thinking and approach that this source material offers to back up this idea that improving English can actually be easier?
Well, if we connect it back to that feeling of struggle we talked about,
Yeah.
the source suggests that difficulty often comes from maybe a misunderstanding of how language acquisition really works for adults. So instead of trying to force progress on all fronts just through willpower,
Right.
they advocate for being deeply intentional and consistently applying that focus.
Intentional and consistent. Okay, but the source dives deeper into what that actually looks like.
Yeah.
Right? It's not just try harder.
Oh, far from it. Intentionality, as they define it in this material, means not just doing something, but doing it with a clear purpose that's tied to your current level and your goals. They might suggest, for instance, that intentional listening means choosing content that's challenging, but still comprehensible, maybe specifically targeting certain sounds or structures, rather than just having English noise on in the background. And consistency, they argue, isn't about some heroic effort, but more about building small, sustainable habits. Little things you do regularly.
That makes a lot of sense. It's about smart practice, not just sheer hard practice.
Yeah.
And you mentioned enjoyable earlier. How does the source frame the importance of enjoyment? Because honestly, that often feels like a luxury, not really a necessity.
Well, the source argues enjoyment isn't just a bonus, it's absolutely fundamental.
Really?
Yeah. Their reasoning is that intrinsic motivation, genuinely wanting to do something because you find it interesting or pleasurable, that's the engine of sustainable progress.
Okay.
They suggest that if your learning activities feel like a chore you dread, then consistency just becomes this constant battle against yourself.
Yeah, I can see that.
But if you find ways to genuinely engage with content, you actually, like whether it's podcasts, videos, music, books, related to your hobbies, whatever the practice stops feeling like studying.
Right.
And becomes something you maybe even look forward to.
So connecting it to your existing interests.
Yeah.
That seems like a really key piece of finding that enjoyment, according to the source.
Definitely.
And what about tackling just the sheer volume of English?
Yeah.
Vocab, grammar.
Yeah.
It still feels like so much. Does the source address that feeling of overwhelm?
It does, very strongly. That's where the idea of taking small, manageable steps comes in, and it's presented as absolutely crucial.
Right.
Trying to learn, say, 1,000 words at once or master every single grammar rule is just overwhelming. The source suggests focusing on incremental progress.
Like what?
Well, maybe mastering just one specific pronunciation sound this week, or really understanding one particular grammar structure through examples you hear in your listening material. These small wins, they argue, build momentum and confidence far more effectively than trying to make these massive leaps. Oh, okay. Breaking it down. That directly fights the I need to master everything at once feeling.
Exactly.
And that ties into prioritizing strategically, which the source is also emphasized, right? You don't have to learn everything immediately.
Precisely. The source strongly advocates for strategic prioritization. And this is where their emphasis on listening as a foundational skill becomes really critical.
Okay, foundational. Why listening specifically?
Their argument basically is that before you can confidently produce language, through speaking or writing, you need to internalize the rhythms, the intonation, the grammatical patterns of English, how it sounds and feels.
Right.
Listening, done intentionally and consistently with enjoyable content, is presented as the primary way to build this intuitive understanding and familiarity.
So the thinking is that a strong listening foundation actually makes speaking and even understanding grammar rules later on feel more natural, because you've already absorbed the patterns subconsciously just through engaging listening.
That's the core insight, yeah. It's not just about comprehension then, but about building the very sound and feel of the language inside you.
That's it. Progress, according to this material, doesn't come from endless, difficult drills or trying to brute force memorization across 5 different areas simultaneously. It comes from targeted, intentional, small steps applied consistently through methods you genuinely enjoy, with listening often being that strategic starting point.
Wow, that really does reframe the whole process, doesn't it? It shifts it from feeling like this grueling uphill battle to something more integrated, almost natural, fueled by positive engagement.
It offers a fundamentally different perspective on how to improve, and maybe why previous attempts might have felt so darn difficult.
Okay, this has been a really fascinating deep dive into this source material. Let's quickly recap some of the key takeaways you can pull from this perspective.
Sure. So at its heart, the sources really challenge that common belief that improving English, especially getting fluent, must be an overwhelming, constant struggle where you have to master everything all at once.
Right. Instead, they argue that intentionality and consistency are the real drivers, not just sheer effort. And that a huge piece of that consistency comes from finding ways to genuinely engage with the language, making practice something you actually look forward to, making it enjoyable.
Exactly. And taking small, manageable steps is highlighted as essential for building momentum and avoiding that overwhelm rather than trying to conquer the entire language in one go.
Yeah.
Prioritizing strategically is also key, with listening specifically identified in these sources as that foundational skill to build first.
So ultimately, the source material makes a pretty strong case that real sustainable progress comes from using simple, enjoyable, and strategically focused methods, not from being in a state of constant difficult struggle.
Yeah, these points offer practical insights that could be incredibly helpful for you on your own journey, providing a kind of roadmap that feels much more sustainable and maybe more effective than that traditional view of language learning struggle.
And like we discussed, if you want a concrete way to start implementing that strategic focus, particularly on building that foundational listening skill, there's that free downloadable guide we mentioned, the Intentional Listening Blueprint.
Yes, exactly. It's designed to help you build that consistent, focused, and fun listening practice the sources identify as so crucial. You can find the link right there in the description for this deep dive.
Definitely seems worth exploring if you're looking for practical steps to apply these ideas. Stepping back, exploring this source material certainly offers a powerful, different mindset.
It really encourages you to question those assumptions about difficulty and effort, doesn't it?
It does. So here's maybe a final thought for you to mull over, straight from the core idea of this source material. Improving your English might just be easier than you think.
Talk to fluency from beginner to fluent.
Take your English skills to the next level.